if only the children of today could go back and see what it was like in the good old days. I can see all those little heads exploding now. These kids are growing up in a whole new, much faster-paced reality, sometimes so fast it's hard for us to keep up.
Kids are moving quickly and parents are adjusting slowly. And so a lot of times parents are still mourning the idea that, there's so much technology in their kids' lives, or they're still trying to like put that genie back in, and it doesn't work that way. And so parents do have to adjust. It's okay to be sad that their childhood doesn't look like yours, but we also have to look at what's the reality for our kids and adjust the parenting.
This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. This spring, I went to a conference for mom content creators called Mom 2.0, which was great the whole way through, but by the last lunch, right before I was about to catch my plane, I hit the jackpot of lunch tables. It was full of dynamic women with a lot to say and eager to collaborate. Dr. Catherine Pearlman was one of these women. We struck up a conversation and I found out she was a licensed clinical social worker with a business called The Family Coach, which was already right up my alley. But then we started talking about projects we were working on. Catherine's eyes put on a fireworks display as she started talking about her new book, a guide for kids about how to navigate their first cell phone called, appropriately, First Phone. I'm always on the lookout for passion like hers because I could tell how genuinely she wants to help families figure out how to navigate tech. And it just so happened that I've been researching kids and tech for years, both to try to figure it out for myself and for this tech series that I've been meaning to do, and which I'm finally starting. In fact, you're listening to it. Several months later, I got Catherine's new book in the mail and I set up an interview immediately. It turned out to be just what I've been looking for. I've read several books about managing kids' technology use geared toward parents, and a couple geared toward kids, but frankly, my kids hated them. They felt patronized by both the language the author used and the overly obvious content. But I had only made it a few chapters in when I couldn't find Catherine's book because my 10-year-old daughter had snagged it and started reading it. What I love most about this book is that it empowers kids to make good choices by assuming they are capable of doing so. It explains potential pitfalls well, but Catherine doesn't use fear tactics to scare kids into following rules or to scare parents into just shutting everything down. If you couldn't already tell, I highly recommend it, especially if you're thinking of giving your kid a phone this holiday season. This would be a great companion gift. But enough of me blathering on about her book. Let's talk to Dr. Catherine Pearlman herself about her take on tech, setting house rules, how she approaches technology with her own family, and even how to deal with the scary stuff. First, I'd love to know what prompted you to write this book.
So it's funny, for years, every now and then a parent would call me and say, oops, my child got into something on the internet. So maybe they ordered something on Amazon and that wasn't approved, or maybe they got into some pornography, or they saw something scary and the parent wants to know what should they do now. And what I realized is a lot of times these parents were very involved parents. They were tech savvy, conscientious parents. And what was interesting to me was that they were still having these issues. And then the pandemic happened, and kids who maybe were on screens an hour a day were now on screens for 8 to 12 hours a day. And just with that much access, there were a lot more oops moments. The learning curve was a lot, quicker, and, kids just got into it. And so I realized I wanted to put something out there that could help families. And there are books for adults on managing your kids' technology, but there really isn't anything for kids. And the other thing I noticed was that even families who are like, we don't have phones for our kids don't have iPads. Well, all your kids' friends do. And so if you're not teaching them at home, they're doing it on the bus, they're doing it at their friend's house at an earlier age than you think. And so I wanted something for kids that they could make good decisions when their parents weren't around.
That's great. I love that you brought that up because sheltering isn't even a possibility these days. Yeah, they're ubiquitous. That's so true. Now, you've been practicing for, I think I read 25 years. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How has this shift in getting to this point where everything's ubiquitous. How has it changed your practice or the things that families are coming to you with?
When I first started, we focus a lot on what the American Academy of Pediatrics said, which was, an hour, depending on age, 2 hours if they were older. Now that's ridiculous. I mean, they're on for 2 hours just for school and for socializing. And even though the pandemic has lightened up, socialization for teenagers is completely different. They don't hang out in groups as they did, they hang out online. And they're doing things together and they're talking, but they're just doing it in a digital space. And so with that comes different problems. And I also have seen kids are less able to actually do things in the real world because they are doing so much online. So something like a good example is they're not getting their driver's licenses. Like when I was growing up, and even for, decades after, when you were ready to get your license, you went right out and got your permit, you got your license, like it was freedom. Kids are not in any rush to get out of their house. They're not in any rush to go out in the real world. And sometimes they're not even bothering to get their license. And so you could see the change in the way kids are acting. And also, what I've noticed is that kids are moving quickly and parents are adjusting slowly. And so a lot of times parents are still mourning the idea that there's so much technology in their kids' lives, or they're still trying to like put that genie back in, and it doesn't work that way. And so parents do have to adjust. It's okay to be sad that their childhood doesn't look like yours, but we also have to look at what's the reality for our kids and adjust the parenting.
I love that. Yeah, just the idea that a lot of us are in a state of denial, or like there's some fear, I think, on the parent side, or just unwillingness to embrace some of the things that our kids are embracing. And we just want to pretend it's not a problem.
Right.
Okay. So I'd like to talk about how to have a healthy tech culture in a home. How do you think parents can approach technology in a way that doesn't cause conflict with their kids?
Well, two things. One is to have house rules, because if you have house rules, then you're not nagging all the time and constantly saying to put your phone down. It's something that's kind of agreed upon early on, and everybody sort of follows those rules. So I think that takes out some of the strife in the relationship. But I also think that parents should try and be curious with their kids. Instead of lecturing or, saying bad things about social media, I think that the more parents get into what their kids are into. So if your kid is really into TikTok, sit down and watch your TikTok videos with your kid. Find out what it is that they're doing. Try and relate to them on what it is they're doing. Like, I could care less about video games, but my son really likes video games. And so I could either lose him and just be like, that's a silly game, I don't know why you spend so much time on that. Or I can sit with him and kind of learn what he's doing, hear his friends talking, see what he's learning in the game. And then as I want to, I could advise. But I think, we have to approach it in a more positive light, that, not all technology is bad. And truthfully, all technology has pros and cons, all of it. And so to be mindful of what those issues are so we can keep our kids safe. But I think at the same time, not lose them to, this other world that they're in, to try and adapt by doing it with them.
That's
Learning.
great. Yeah. What are some of the ways that technology can positively affect a family?
Oh my gosh, there are so many great things that we're doing in families. For example, I have a niece that was born in New York during the pandemic. I live in California. And not only do I FaceTime her, I watch her sleeping in her crib. I have access to her crib cam. I mean, for a baby I have not met, I feel like I know her. That is just a silly example, but it was so important to me. So my parents can FaceTime with the kids and talk to them. I know some families who literally have grandparents at meals. Like, they just stick the iPad up at the table and it's like they're sharing a meal. So there's that. One thing that I always talk about is with teenagers, texting is another way to talk to your teen in a way that's much easier for them. So if you think your kid is going to tell you their problems face to face, that's not happening. Most teens have a hard time initiating the conversation, but they have a lot easier time texting. And so if I see my daughter is going through something and she can't talk about it, I might just say, text me. text me what's going on. And that will start the conversation and break the ice. And then we could bring it offline again and then talk in person. But, there's so many fun things that kids are doing in terms of making videos, and parents can do all that stuff with their kids.
I like that idea that texting is an addition and not a replacement, because I think sometimes people feel threatened, like, oh, people don't talk anymore. It's just replaced with texts, even especially between teenagers. But, they still talk when they get together, and to look at it as just a different form, a different medium. Even today that happened with my son and I was busy while he was leaving for a sporting event, and I just was able to say, oh, wish I could be there, good luck, all that stuff. Now he has like a physical reminder that I am excited for him, and just saying that as he left the door might not have made such an impact.
Right. And, it's something that also, it's like a record. In
Yeah.
some ways, that's actually nice. We can scroll back. I have a friend who texts with her daughter, who I think is like 9. And the girl is the funniest thing ever in text. Not so funny in person. I mean, she's adorable, but in texting, she has such a funny sense of humor. That stuff is priceless. That is like a record of who she was at this time. And it's so special. So, I think that when we have an open mind and, we still teach the kids skills to communicate in person, in real life, there's nothing wrong with also texting.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about setting boundaries and how to approach that with the kids. How do you suggest starting the conversation with your kids if maybe you have been a little lax in setting boundaries?
So first, I want to say, for all the parents who feel like they've made mistakes and everything is ruined and their kids have a free for all with their screens, it is never too late to make a change. You can always decide, we're just going to discuss this and I'm going to impose a new rule. It will be painful, but it will be over in a few days. So don't feel like, oh, I haven't done these things, I don't know what to do now. You can always change. But I think it's a little bit of a balance of, sometimes parents do know what's best for kids. And in some areas, like for example, I have a firm rule that there are no phones in the bedroom at nighttime. And there is no amount of negotiating and discussing that my kids can do that will make me change my mind. I know what I know, and that's just going to have to be a non negotiable. However, I might be more flexible on what type of social media they have on their phone. Again, my kids are older, or where they keep their phone during the day, or just how they use their phone in other ways. And maybe they do things that seem wrong to me, but they make a good argument and I'm for it. So that works with older teens. I think with younger kids, especially now, kids are getting their phones between 8 and 11. I think with younger kids, you can have more supervision, more rules, but then you do have to adjust those rules as your kids get older. So I think some things for discussion, but some things I think the parent needs to just decide what the rule is and enforce it.
Yeah. Well, and for a long time, I was kind of caught in a little bit of a fear cycle with technology. And I would think, oh, this is brand new. This is something that parents have never had to deal with. But now that I have experienced it more, my oldest is 16, I realize that really the same principles that apply to all parenting and all boundary setting apply to technology. Like, you have to have good communication. You have to often you have to explain what the reasons behind the boundaries, age appropriately
Mm-hmm.
and the other thing that I'm just exploring is that not only do rules have to change with age, but they have to change with the personalities of your kids. So the rules for one of my kids isn't going to be the same as the rules for another.
Right. And that works for some rules. And
Yeah,
then again, for other rules, it doesn't. It wouldn't make
right.
sense. But I agree. I have 2 kids. They use technology completely differently. One barely uses his phone, barely texts. He's mostly on Discord and video games. And the other one is completely on TikTok and social media. So, the rules don't necessarily apply the same way to them because they're using technology very differently. I could tell my son to put his phone away. He's on his computer. So he's doing the same thing, but on his computer. Me telling him to put his phone away is irrelevant.
Right. Yeah, it's been interesting to see how different personalities engage the different technologies differently. So I have 5. So my oldest is 16 and then down to 7 who, he doesn't have a phone, but he certainly engages with technology still. So,
Mhm.
so let's, if you don't mind me making it more personal, what has been your own journey with using tech in your home, and what are some of the things that you've learned along the way?
So both my kids got their phones at 11 in sixth grade. And I think that was for them as much as it was for me. You know, it was convenient for me to be able to communicate with them. And I also felt like it was a good time where we could learn together. I think what I've learned is by the time the kid is 14, 15, you really have to have those lessons in place. They're really much more focused on their friends and the outside world and less on parents being involved in their, phone and social media. I think it makes a lot of sense to check a kid's phone at 11 and 12, but 15, 16-year-olds should have some level of privacy. So I've kind of learned to adjust and how I think. And we started with just Instagram for social media, and we did it together. So I would monitor what they did and what they posted. And that was a learning experience for all of us. And I tried to do it with a tone of education and not punishment or shaming. So I was really careful about the way I approached my kids. So once my daughter was young, she posted a picture that I just felt was not something that she would want in the future or that someone could use in an inappropriate way. There was nothing wrong with it, but I still didn't think that was the right picture for her. And I didn't want to shame her. I wanted to approach it in a very gentle way and try and explain why I thought she might not, and then talk through it, and she understood where I was coming from, and she made the decision herself. Oh yeah, I didn't see that. I didn't see what was there. I'm going to take that down. Or even just a comment, she might be making a comment and she thinks it's no big deal, and I read it and explain to her, hey, your friend doesn't see this, that you're laughing. She doesn't see the social cues that are going on for you. So I think she might read that in a way that's not how you intended. And then she would say, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. So we kind of did it together as like a learning. And then it was, for me, I could learn, what is she interested in? What is she clicking on? What's suggested on her reels? So that I could kind of understand and discuss those things rather than, just sort of leave her to the wolves. And I think tone is the most important thing, really not coming in with a harsh tone or punishing or, just lecturing. You're just losing your kids. And what's going to happen is they go underground and they just don't tell you what's happening. They could have social media accounts, you don't even know they exist. So to me, I wanted to prevent them feeling like they couldn't come talk to me or they couldn't show me something. And so, I was really careful, even if on the inside I might be freaking out. On the outside, I tried to remain very calm. And like I said, for my son, he uses his phone very little. And it's really more about what he's doing on Discord. And that was really more talking about predators and strangers and information that we share and who are these people that you're on with, and what are you doing on there. So that was a different learning curve.
Yeah. Yeah, and all of that is in your book, which is great.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
so
I mean, I
thorough.
did try to
Yeah.
use real
Yeah.
life in my house and also with people I know, so that when people read the book, they're like, yes, this is what I'm seeing too, so that wasn't just like a theoretical thing where I'm
Yeah.
just like, here's what I think you should know. Yeah.
Totally. So one of the things I struggle with the most is that kind of seesaw of like micromanage, micromanage, micromanage. Then I'm like, oh, I'm micromanaging. I'm going to give them some freedom. And like with either the amount of time they spend on TV or video games or what I'm allowing them to look at or the amount of time I'm giving them on social media, things like that. Um, how do you navigate that balance between like, I guess, agency and micromanagement?
Hmm. So I think on some level, that kind of seesaw approach is great, because I think as long as you're regularly kind of reassessing, then I think you can make changes as needed. I think that that's okay. We can't know everything. Sometimes there's unintended consequences or something we didn't foresee, and now it's just gotten out of hand. I will say, when I was writing the book, I looked at my own screen time usage, which I had never done before, and I was horrified by how much time I'm spending on Instagram and Facebook. I mean, hours and hours a day. And so I added a limitation to my phone so I can only spend an hour a day, max total. But it's something that I didn't think about. I didn't even realize I was doing. So I think that kind of seesaw is okay. and parents should give themselves a little bit of a break. Like, this is hard stuff. We can't know all the time how to handle. But I do think, parenting changes as our kids get older. Like the way we parent a 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds is really very different than how we should be parenting a teenager. And we need to shift to less micromanaging, which is hard for all of us, to more empowering. And I once heard Julie Lithcott-Hames talk about this issue of adulting and saying that our job as parents is to put ourselves out of a job. And that just really struck me. And I think about that all the time. And I recommend that to parents. What you're doing actually helping your kid learn how to manage themselves in the real world? Or is it just worried about the dangers? Instead of worrying about the dangers, educate your kids so they can make good decisions, and then give them a little bit of some space, and then let them work on it, and then give them a little bit more space. So progressive independence is what we should be going for. And I think as parents of teenagers, it's hard for us to let go, partly because we can sense they're moving out of our realm. And sometimes we grasp on harder, or we feel just so good doing something for them. It just makes us feel close to them. But we shouldn't be doing for them all the time, because then we're sending them out in the real world unprepared.
Right.
So it is a little bit of a balance, but I do like the idea of really shifting the way we parent as our kids age. I think that's really important. And I also think that's what preserves our relationships with them.
Yeah, I love that acknowledgement that it has to be customized. So it keeps coming up to me that like it really is in line with so many other aspects of parenting. Again, like what you were just saying, with having the goal of them being able to regulate and manage by themselves. One of the things that always kind of made me a little more fearful on the technology side is the whole like frontal lobe development thing. Like they don't know how to limit their own time and things like that. So what about specifically time on devices? How do you manage that in your home? I know your son likes video games. So how do you set limits on the amount of time, and how do you eventually shift that to them being able to have that control?
So I think it's a really important question, because what we've learned through the research that's still emerging is that it doesn't even matter what you're doing. Even if you're doing all educational stuff, the longer that kids are on screens, the more likely it is that they have a negative outcome, whether it's anxiety and depression, whether it's low self-esteem, or lower outcomes in school. So managing the amount of time they're on screens is actually important. And instead of doing what we used to do, which is only 1 or 2 hours a day, that's unrealistic. I like to build in screen free time so that there are certain non-negotiable times where we know that screens are put away. And that's the way we do it in our family. And so that's no arguing, no nagging. It's just an accepted rule. So a recommendation is, meal times, everyone puts their phone down, including parents. We are the worst, just like our kids. When we're doing homework, we don't use our screens, or if we have to use a screen, we limit our access to social media and those kind of things. I set up a limitation on my phone for the number of hours that I can spend on social media. There are these great settings in iPhone and other apps that can help you limit access to the internet. And the thing is, it's not just our kids. These screens and these apps were made to keep our attention, to constantly draw us back in. And so that's what happens. We go to look something up real quick, and the next thing you know, a half hour has passed. Not only did we not look up the thing we started, but we've just wasted an hour, a half hour of our time. And I think we need external help. We can no longer say to our kids, you need to remember that you only get an hour a day. And when that hour is up, you need to put your phone down. That's actually unrealistic. We all need these external
Yeah.
ways of, shutting down. So my husband, when he's working, he puts an internet blocker on for 2 hours. So he can't even look something up if he wanted to and really focus. So we have to find these ways that work for us and for our kids. And it's not a punishment. It's the way the world is right now. It's just such a distracting world. We've definitely struggled with this in our home, especially with my son, because he's doing all his work on his computer. And that's also where all his friends are on Discord. Yeah. And so I can't know exactly what he's doing when, because he's at his computer, he's doing homework, unless I'm literally sitting behind him. And at nearly 16, that's not going to work. So we're still engaging in this problem. We're talking about using alarms. We're also using blockers. So things that can aid him, again, without feeling like it's all your fault. We all need help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good reminder. And it's good to talk to our children about what we struggle with too, so that it doesn't sound like we're just always attacking them. I really like that. In fact, I recently told my son, he's just starting out on Instagram, and this is my 13-year-old. And so we've just set, 15 minutes a day on Instagram so he can just, check what he wants to check and get out. And then we just decided that, and then we'll reassess. But I was able to tell him, like, I just blocked my Instagram use after 3 o'clock when the kids come home. And so explaining to him that even as an adult, he'll have to continue to set boundaries. He appreciated that, I could tell, because no kids like to be babied. So,
Mm-hmm.
so I like that. Okay. So what do you advise for parents if they stumble upon a problem like pornography use, or heaven forbid, a predator online? What suggestions do you have for dealing with kind of the scary stuff?
So first is there will be scary stuff. There will be mistakes. Your kids are going to click on the wrong thing. They're going to offer information that they shouldn't have. They're going to access pornography. That is a given. So if we can accept that this is going to happen and that mistakes happen, then we can really try and approach it differently when our kids come to us, because that is my main goal, is that we want our kids to come to us. And so how we respond to those problems is going to determine whether they come to us again. And so the more calm you can be, the more open, the less shame you can put on the situation, the more likely you are to actually have an influence and to continue to have an influence in the future. So I do think it is good to talk to your kids about these things ahead of time. Scammers are and predators are incredibly smart and know exactly what to say to prey on our vulnerabilities. And I know many adults who have fallen for scams, and I am sure that children will also fall for scams. So we have to educate them all the time. I'm constantly saying, oh, look what I got from UPS. It's not UPS. Look at this Netflix thing. It's not Netflix. And so the more education we can do, the smarter our kids will be. But when mistakes do happen, thank your kid for coming to you. Tell them that it's great that they were able to share this with you. You're going to figure it out together. And, one is they might have seen something that's very upsetting to them. So if we just jump to the lecturing and the shaming, we actually will never get to the part that they saw something upsetting. So we really need to kind of hold back and let them tell us about what it was and, how they're feeling about it. And we should ask open-ended questions, not just yes or no, not just lecturing, but, how do you feel? Tell me more about that. What can you share with me? Really get them to talk about it. Again, this is where texting can sometimes be helpful, because these are things that are hard for kids to talk about. And also to realize as parents, there is a normal amount of exploration that happens, just like we were kids and we might go to the library and look up, page 179 in this one book we knew was sort of racy. There's a normal amount of interest and exploration that happens in terms of bodies and interests, and that we could maybe talk to our kids about what's different about pornography. If you're curious, here is a resource for you. And then if a kid actually has a problem with something, like sometimes someone clicks on something and then now it shows up all the time,
Mm-hmm.
you can go in and kind of help them with that and to avoid, seeing those things. But the best tip I have is to not shame your kid, to really come in with a calm demeanor. Again, even if you're freaking out inside, and listen, and help your kid through this problem.
Yeah, I love that. And I loved that section where you addressed the mistakes. That was such a beautiful way to end it. It was really nice.
Honestly, I haven't had a person of any age who can say I actually didn't learn something. Like, a
Yeah.
lot of adults have read the book, and every adult has said I actually learned something. Like, my password is not at all secure, or I also fell for a scam and here's what the mistake I made. And just everyone has to be reminded, because this is complicated stuff. So I kind of wrote it for kids, but I do think it's really for everyone.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even just like how to use hashtags and how not to use emojis. Some of those little common sense things, like I remember learning phone etiquette, and my son was a lot older than I was when I realized that I had never taught that to him. He was like 12 or something answering the phone, and I was like appalled at the way he was answering the phone. And I realized we all grew up answering the family phone, and we had to learn that, but I never remember to teach that to my kids since we all have our own devices, So yeah, there's
And not only that, our kids are not used to calling people
yeah.
and asking for their friend with their mother on the line, or calling a doctor, or doing all these things. And I really made a shift as my kids got older to say, like, you can call. Like, you have a question, you call. I can be with you. I'm happy to help you. But I have to empower them and teach them. They literally do not know how to call someone. Yeah,
Yeah.
it takes practice. I think that parents should really consider digital education in the same way we kind of think of health education. It's ongoing and it never ends, because a lot of times parents think, oh, I get them the phone, we do a contract, maybe they read a book together, and then we're good. Not good. It's ongoing. Things change. There are updates. There are new scams. There are new privacy concerns. And so this should just be part of our lives. Once a month at dinner, bring this up, have this as part of our regular conversation, because we all need to keep learning to stay safe, So yeah, I just want to encourage parents to keep going.
What a great way to end. I love how hopeful and encouraging Catherine is. Even if you seesaw back and forth like I do, at least you're staying engaged, trying new experiments, and continuing to learn. Of course, one of the ways you and your kids can learn is by reading Catherine's book, First Phone. But she also has other resources available on her website, thefamilycoach.com, including a sample phone contract, a list of conversation starters, and a cheat sheet for her book. I'll provide a link in my show notes and on the episode page on howshemoms.com. Thank you so much for listening to the How She Moms podcast and for being part of this community. There are so many other ways for you to connect and hopefully also contribute. I share tips and ideas regularly on Instagram and Facebook at How She Moms. You can find past episodes and other resources at howshemoms.com. And you can always just email me directly at whitney@howshemoms.com. Special thanks to my own wonderful mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.